Good morning. Something came to mind this morning, thinking about marriage and thinking about all these divorces that are happening, and even within the church, even within churches, you see divorces happening, and which is doesn't feel like it should be. That doesn't feel like it should happen. But I was thinking about something. I've in our church we've read through the qualifications not too long ago for a preacher, and I've read through the qualifications for a deacon just recently in our Sunday school class. And there's a qualification here that I always thought was probably the easy qualification. At least that was the one where it's like, okay, it says here, a bishop in 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 2, a bishop must be blameless, the husband of one wife. And I always thought, okay, the husband of one wife, that's easy enough. Just, need to not be a polygamist. Well, apparently that also means that you have to be the husband of not only just one in terms of number, but also one in terms of succession. So the first wife would be that what that means. So in order to be a pastor, you have to be the husband of one wife. Well, a deacon has the same qualification. I just went way too far. That was my goodness. Okay, a deacon has the same qualification. Basically saying here, likewise the deacons must be grave, and yep. And then down here, let's see, where's it at? Let the deacons be the husbands, in verse 12, the husbands of one wife. So perhaps the reason why the divorce rate is so high within churches is perhaps the reason why the devil is attacking households like this is this very reason. Because you don't qualify to be a minister of God unless you meet that standard. There's two offices in the church, and they both have the same qualification of the husband of one wife. There's other qualifications too, but that one kind of stood out to me. And I guess the question is then, well, then how do we, you have to, then not only do you have to be all these different things that the Bible tells you to be, and you have to manage a church, but you also have to manage a wife and possibly kids and keep all of them happy. And then you ask the question, well, how do you do that? Trust me, I understand it's not always an easy thing to keep a wife happy. There's a lot of, especially a wife in her flesh, there's a lot there that is constantly changing, constantly, it doesn't always stay the same. The goalpost moves. The Bible even talks about, and it's talking about a woman in her flesh being that her ways are movable. So you have to be careful. I think it's important that you pick the right wife. Now, I'm not one of these people that believes there's only one woman for one man on the earth. That there's like one man can only marry, like I can only marry one woman in this entire earth, and there's no one else out there that could be married to. I have to find mine. I'm not a believer of that. However, I do believe that for people in churches who want to be useful in the ministry, if they're going to be married, they need to be careful about who they choose to be a wife. There's a lot of men out there, we know. There's a lot of wolves in sheep's clothing, a lot of devils in pastor's clothing who will deceive and will draw women. The Bible talks about drawing silly women away. They'll draw women away from the word, from the church, from what God may have placed them in. But there's also a lot of wolves in sheep's clothing that are female. The Bible doesn't talk a lot about that, but it goes both ways. There's a lot of women who pertain themselves to be virtuous and Christian, who in reality on the inside are just ravening. They're maybe they're even less wolf and more mama bear, like just the kind of person that will just leave destruction in her wake. So I think it's important that you choose the right kind of woman, because it takes this woman, like in 1 Peter chapter 3. It takes a woman with the Holy Spirit to be in subjection to her own husband. It takes a woman with the Holy Spirit to obey, continue to be subject to her husband, even when they don't obey the word, when they're not listening, when the Bible tells them to do something, when there's Bible commands. They might go to church and hear the preaching, and that preaching commands, and their ears are stopped, their mind is seared. It takes a special kind of woman to live a chaste lifestyle. That's what this means here with a conversation talking about won by the conversation of the wives. So it takes a special kind of woman to look at a man like that and to be willing to stay around even in the hard times and not go and slander her husband on social media, not go and slander her husband to her parents, to just stay there and work at it and just live the right life in front of her husband and let him see what he's missing. Let him see what he see what it looks like to be a true child of God, a true believer in Jesus Christ. It takes a special kind of woman. It takes a woman with that spirit, with the Holy Spirit. I don't believe a woman in the world can do this. I believe a woman with the Holy Spirit has to do this, because the woman with the Holy Spirit the Holy Spirit, I think, is going to prompt that woman to continue in this. But a woman without the Holy Spirit, I don't think can do this for very long. Obviously not living a godly conversation anyway, or living a godly lifestyle anyway. And just more on here that in 1 Peter 3 that, honestly, if you look at it, you're like, it takes a real, it takes a woman with the Holy Spirit to do these things. But I'm going to come down here in verse 7, not 12, I don't know what I was thinking, where it says, "Likewise, ye husbands, dwell with them according to knowledge." Truth is, you know your wife. You know who she is. You know her frame. Not as well as God does, but you know her. And you know when she's for the most part, you can look at her and tell if she's happy, if she's not happy, if she's satisfied, if she's not satisfied. You can tell those things generally. Obviously, communication is important. But this assumes that if you're married to a woman, you're going to know her. You're going to know her pretty well. And you're going to dwell with her according to knowledge. I believe that's a knowledge not only of her, but also of the Word, and of, understanding what it means to love your wife as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. What the meaning of love your wife and be not bitter against her. Those things, I think it's important. And those are knowledge that I think we all need to have. Giving honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers be not hindered. And as unto the weaker vessel, let me ask you a question. Which vessels do you give honor to? Which bowls, which plates, which cups do you give honor to in the house? We have many houses have what's called a china cabinet that they hold fine china in. That's your weaker stuff. You drop that stuff, it breaks. I have Rubbermaid bowls. I don't worry about dropping those things. Those things don't matter. You drop it, you just pick it up, and you just, whatever. It's not that big of a deal. But I have glass stuff. I have that stuff that if you drop it, it breaks. It's gone. It breaks into pieces. That's the weaker vessel. You give honor to that. You lift that up. You don't bow to it, but you love on that. Now, are we going to be perfect in that? No, we're not. I know I'm not perfect in it. And unfortunately, there's also a vigilance that comes with that. Because if you're not vigilant, there will be wolves that are going to try to pull them away. There will be wolves that will get their attention. There will be wolves that will sneak themselves into that, many times purporting themselves to be Christian. And even though they have the Word, even though they use Bibles or books that they call Bibles, even though they use these, they ignore the verses about the sanctity of marriage. They ignore the verses about how a wife should treat a husband or a husband should treat a wife. If they're going after the woman, a lot of times they will look at the verses about the husband and the wife and say, well, why isn't he doing this for you? Why isn't he doing that for you? And of course, they know about as much as the guy on the street, because they don't live in the house. But it doesn't really matter, does it? It's not about that for them. For them, it's about getting her out. Because once they can get her out from under her husband, then she becomes available to do whatever they want to do with. So, anyway, that was kind of a bit of a tangent. I think it's important. And the point of all this is, as a husband, as a man specifically, we need to be careful about who we choose. We need to be careful about being sure that we're not unequally yoked at the time of marriage. Because if we get married to the wrong person, it will hurt our ministry. If we don't dwell with our wives according to knowledge and give them the honor as unto the weaker vessel, it can make our prayers be hindered. Just like I believe that if a woman doesn't submit to her husband, doesn't submit with, she's not subject to her husband, if she doesn't do the things that the Bible tells her to do, I believe it would hinder her prayers as well. So I think we're all in the same boat, but at the same time, this is mainly for men, and I believe that we need to be careful who we marry. I am married. I'm currently estranged from my wife. There's a divorce proceeding happening. And I'm still praying that God put his hand in this situation. And there may be hope for reconciliation or restoration down the road. But if you're listening to this and you haven't been married, be careful. Be careful to marry somebody who has demonstrated already a love for Jesus Christ. Someone who's going to church. Look for people at church. You'll see who they are over the period of time, and you'll have a better understanding of who you're marrying. So I hope this helps somebody. I kind of rambled a little bit in this one. I hope it helps someone. Love you.